I provided you comments in advance, and for those of you who want to access them digitally, I put them on VCE's server, so you can go to vce.org/1234.pdf, and you can find them there. And I have 10 copies. Anyone who would like a hard copy.
We've got hard copies in our.
So those are for the people who are here, if you'd like them.
Who is this, please?
My name is Annette Smith. I am Executive Director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment, and I supplied you with some substantive comments earlier this week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for asking me to come in. I'd like to keep my testimony brief to give you as much time as you would like to ask me questions. A summary of my testimony is that I have been assisting members of the public and towns in participating in the Public Service Board process for several years, and it is a legal process. It is a process that does not have a public participation component to it, and it is my opinion, based on the experience that I have, that it really can't be fixed to turn it into the kind of public process that people need and want, especially with solar siting and renewable energy siting. So while I have provided you with an extensive list of recommendations, should you choose to focus only on trying to fix the PSB process, I think it's a fairly expensive list, and I think it is a list that would be challenging to implement. And so I have a second solution part, which is about moving the siting and land use issues to Act 250. And this was supported yesterday by Vermont League of Cities and Towns at their annual meeting, which passed that the LCT supports renewable energy siting moved to Act 250 jurisdiction. So I also brought some copies of that if anybody's interested in what they did at the meeting yesterday. Vermonters for a Clean Environment has worked in a lot of areas: landfills, quarries, large farms, mostly contentious issues involving the interface of industrial and residential areas. And in our experience, the community-based stakeholder process really works. We have successfully worked with OMIA in a community-based stakeholder process. They now go around saying, "You made us a better company." We are currently in a stakeholder process with Agrimark Cabot over the disposition of their wastewater. We've done a community-based stakeholder process over a water disinfection issue, and also helped a community deal with the gravel pit expansion. I brought this book, which is called Facilitating Wind Energy Development, and it comes from a 2011 Department of Energy sponsored workshop that I was approved to participate in. There were about 100 people there. There were a couple of people from the department there. And I was real suspicious of the title, had no idea what I was going to. It's 100 people. It was at Harvard Law School. And it was led by the founder of their Alternative Dispute Resolution Program, Lawrence Susskind, and I was really happy to find out that it was a 3-day workshop on teaching wind developers how to do a community-based stakeholder process. So I sat at the table with First Wind and Iberdrola and a whole host of the developers. We did role plays. I got to play a wind developer. That was fun. And so, you know, the format works no matter what the topic. Dr. Susskind is a brilliant teacher. It was a real honor to learn from him. And we need to get away from fighting. We have got to get away from this contested case in the first instance. And so you'll find the last page of my proposal involves creating a new program using the Act 250 infrastructure that enables people to come together in the first instance, already allowed under existing statute, no changes are necessary, and sit down and bring people together and talk about the issues. And then if people want to fight, then the next stage, in which I think we really need to consider, is how to give the public access to court. And that could be done through intervenor funding. And I provided a link to, for instance, New York State has Article 10, and they have a formula for doling it out. The issues have always been, is it just for experts, or you have to have lawyers and experts? If you want to have a contested case, let's have a contested case. I also recently went over to New Hampshire to observe their site evaluation committee reviewing a wind case and to see, I talked to their counsel for the public, so I got some insight into that. So that's really the fundamental suggestions that I have, that we can move forward in a much more positive and less contested way for a lot of these projects.
So, Judge Mello, I'm going to go to you first, but then I'll ask my question afterwards. Do you have a question for Annette Smith?
Sure. Have you discussed these ideas with the DPS, and do they support it, oppose it?
I have been trying to bring forward this idea of collaboration literally for years. And frankly, I have been completely shut out by the Shumlin administration. My ideas are not welcome. I presented this this graphic that's on the last page to Representative Klein's committee in January of 2015. Nobody's interested in hearing from me. That's been my experience.
You're here.
I'm here today, and
we're
I
interested
appreciate
in
that.
hearing from you.
But it's just, you know, in the last few years, my ideas have not been welcome.
Okay.
So we've been through, Judge Mello's, Chris Recchio, we've been through a energy generation siting commission, a solar energy siting commission, a variety of other reports and findings that we need to do. And, you know, actually, I think there's a lot of merit to what Annette is proposing here, and this discussion is about the board, not the public service department. There's plenty of work that the public service department needs to do, but this discussion is about the board's improvement of its process. We have supported various activities for the board to engage in to address the difficulty and penetration of the board process. And at this point, I think you know, we've discussed how to integrate Act 250 criteria into the board process, but I am not saying, I think Annette's proposals are sound and actually have merit in terms of dealing with how to differentiate the energy generation stuff from the land use piece of this that is becoming more and more prevalent. So,
And I did make a presentation to the Electric Generation Siting Commission. It was actually requested by then Commissioner Miller and Deputy Commissioner Hoffman, and it was all about this stakeholder process. And then Scott Johnstone, who was on it, was very interested in the idea, and so I introduced him to Patrick Field, the head of Consensus Building Institute, and then it just got completely thrown. Because I was trying to help the work forward and actually how one would create this new process. And I was, you know, they're happy to work, to be hired, whatever, but I'm trying.
Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for this, for giving this to us ahead of time. And I thought your list of recommendations to promote ease of citizen participation, which you called Roman numeral 1, the solution.
Page 11.
On page 11, going on to page 12, had a lot of really specific, good recommendations. I had some questions about them. One was, you had a recommendation to improve public notice, and I'm wondering if you have any specific recommendations for how notice could be improved, but also how notice of public hearings could be improved. I mean, so two types of notice.
So I will also note that I shared my draft a couple of times with a number of people, and so that was one that came from somebody who felt completely blindsided. This comes out of the blue for people.
Right.
So in the initial instance, the recommendation in terms of notice was send that citizens guide with the notice, because
Right.
otherwise people are scrambling. They don't know what to do. Just putting
Yeah.
a link in.
That was a good suggestion
Yeah.
here in your list, and not only to provide it up front, but also to write it in
And actually
layman's language.
improve it.
Right.
I did hear from Cynthia Barber, who she said actually edited it for the board years ago. but so much has changed, there's so much different, and it really needs to be written much more in layperson's language. What I've kind of done with this document is kind of deconstructed the Public Service Board process to take it, let's look at each piece of it. And so the notice provision is difficult for people who don't use computers. We have a lot of Vermonters who don't use computers and who have a very poor service. So that's been one of my challenges in
So
dealing
did
with
you
the
have a
public.
specific recommendation? I mean, maybe at some point we could, drill down on that if it
Okay.
would take too much of this. But I'd be interested at some point in hearing more about, practical suggestions on both kinds of notice. And we were talking about this yesterday, and we were thinking, for example, we have this practice longstanding that it's actually required by statute to publish notice of hearings in the legal notices, for example. And, the world's changing. Not everyone reads legal notices.
Actually, it's very important still to print those. It's a challenge now with the Rutland Herald Times
Right.
Argus not printing the paper because
Exactly.
Right, but,
I read all the notices.
there could be a
and-
way to expand that, for example, with, not just legal notices, but calendar of events or, display ads. But anyway, that's
Right.
the kind of
And
place
the
we're
public
thinking.
hearing notice, I mean, even for the notice for your hearing next week, how do you get the word out? I
Right.
mean, you issue the press releases and hope the media picks them up and hope people read them. People have way too much going on now. And so, it is one of those areas that I think Act 250 is very good at. That's why I really, forget the law for a minute, I really like the infrastructure that exists there because they have somebody to talk to. So if you get a notice, you can call somebody up and say, what's going on here? And so it's that one piece that is so important, and they're very good at helping identify stakeholders.
Okay.
So, for instance, in one project I've just seen recently, there are all kinds of people who are affected who aren't the joiners, and so they're not on the notice list. Well, if there was a district coordinator, you could call and say, wait a minute, there's this, and then the district coordinator would call the applicant. So it's not just the notice itself, it's this complete lack of the ability to have communication. And I want to make it clear to the people here from the board, I'm not criticizing the board in my comments. I think they're dealing with a structure that's very difficult and that wasn't set up for dealing with the public. And I don't think that the board understands how to deal with the public. And I, for whatever reason, have an ability to deal with the public. And so in terms of the clerk is doing a really much better job. But she can't answer questions. She has to go to I don't know what goes on behind the curtain, but she has to go to somebody else to get answers. And then the answers come back, sometimes in a very good time, but sometimes not, and never to the sort of thing you would get if you could just have a conversation.
Right. One thing that's come up, not only in your suggestions, but also in previous meetings here, is that one of the barriers to understanding is the confusion about the difference in what the board does and what the department does.
Total confusion.
And so that's one thing that we are consciously going to think about and try to, and hopefully solve. One way to do that has come up, and I think you mentioned it too, is to change one or both names so they don't sound so similar. And
Well, I must say, when Liz Miller came up with the idea of changing it to Public Service Department, we said, no, red flag, don't do it. It was a really bad idea.
what's the difference to many people?
It's
The
just made it
difference
worse.
between a board and a department
Yeah.
is vague at best and perhaps interchangeable. But did you have a suggestion on what?
I do
I'm
have
just
one,
curious if you have a
suggestion, actually, that I think that what the Public Service Board does is the traditional role of the Public Utilities Commission.
Mhm.
And maybe you just need to be a PUC and not overcomplicate it.
Yeah.
Because that's, it's a standard phrase. It's what the work is that you're doing. I don't quite understand why it isn't a Public Utilities Commission. Now, does that complicate things because now we have merchant developers? I don't think it does, because what a traditional PUC does, all these merchant developers have to integrate with utilities, and so if we were to move the siting to Act 250, all of that traditional PUC work would be even clarified about what is the role of the PUC, and then the department could stay, I would warn you about holding a name contest, though. It would not be pretty.
Right.
Not right now.
Yeah, maybe
And
just
that's not
change
agree
one
on
time.
that
we were
one.
gonna, that was how we're gonna raise money to help pay, help the
my
interveners,
goodness.
but, okay,
Well,
that
let's say
doesn't work.
some of us have had some
Okay.
fun with it. You
I
wouldn't like
bet.
the results, so.
Like that.
Anyway, a lot of your list I appreciate, and I think it does sync with some of the conversations we've had here and also at the board.
And then, of course, if you can do the citizens guide, and it can't be too long either. I mean,
Right.
it's a really challenging thing to try and work what this regime is, which is all legalistic. And I'm trying to say, look, even if you're going to do, like, I ask June questions, and I get back answers that are quite legalistic. And they're links to things, and you have to go read the law, and you have to go read that, and it does not work for the public. You've got to put it in lay terms, and it needs to be succinct, and you cannot ask people to spend 20 hours reading a booklet to understand how to participate just to get some trees planted for solar panels. So it needs to be written in a way that is very accessible, and I think if you got citing out of it, it would be a whole lot easier.
And one more quick question, and I hope that there's a quick
Go ahead.
answer. I didn't realize I'm occupying time here, but one of your recommendations is that state agency staff with expertise be required to attend site visits, not just attorneys. So sometimes there have been, in my experience, like someone from A&R, and I'm thinking of state agencies,
Mhm.
someone, one or two from the department, including an aesthetics expert. What were you thinking beyond that?
This actually came up very recently, and it was Elizabeth, who's not here today, who made the comment because she was out filming something, and she said, Agency of Natural Resources sent a lawyer, and then the department sent a lawyer, and here they were
I see
talking
what
about
you're
the
saying.
wetlands issues, they were
You're talking about a
about
staff person.
who has some, yeah, who can.
Like, for example, with the example of A&R, not the A&R attorney, but perhaps the A&R biologist.
If you have somebody, if there's bobolink issues, then you
Okay,
would bring a
thanks.
bird
That
person.
helped, I didn't
Yeah.
understand that, now I get it, thank you.
Yeah, that's only recently come up, and it's, I think it's a very good point, that you can't have lawyer, and the report was the lawyers were making really inaccurate comments at the site visit, which I don't think helps anybody. I don't think it helps the board to hear statements that are not based on what the actual science is.
Anybody else? So you've answered, I think as you've been talking, you answered one of my questions. Can you just talk briefly, let's see, we've got a couple minutes. Can you just talk briefly about this process, and then keeping in mind that the new legislation, that Act 174, also includes some municipal and planning that is new and different. So we're going to see some siting decisions coming from the, bubbling up from the local and
Or you
regional
may
levels.
not.
So,
I mean, if you look at what VLCT also approved yesterday, they say that it fell far short, that standards are burdensome and complex. That's actually language coming from VLCT.
just keeping VLCT aside for now, but as the legislation is written, it calls for municipalities and regions to identify appropriate sites for.
If they want to, it's not mandatory.
I understand that.
So-
So if that is in place, how would that influence this flow chart?
Well, as you see, this flow chart is about way more than the Public Service Board process. I've had way too much experience with permit reform. You have too.
Haven't we all?
We've all been there, we've been around this long. And so I tried to look at what would get us consistent land use decisions, because now we have inconsistent land use decisions coming from all different areas. And even ag permits, you know, you can have a farm with 9,999 lambs on it to be slaughtered, and there is no public process at all for the public. That was what was proposed for the South Woodstock Water Buffalo Farm, and I came in there, helped them figure out there was no public process, and they ended up creating Vermont Farmstead cheese. So there's a good, I mean, when you look at the work that Vermonters for a Clean Environment do, we do tough work, and a lot of times there's really good outcomes. And so in trying to figure out how to create a more fair process, one that allows people to collaborate, but then if they want to litigate, then it's a more even playing field, the idea of having one 5-member land use panel makes sense. So, but I want to get back to your question in terms of how that would fit in. So the planning piece, I just feel the way that it's been sort of identified as the problem is misplaced. I do not believe that town plans are the problem. And I serve on my town planning commission, and I serve on the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, and I've been involved in several ad hoc versions of the committee to try and come up with energy plans. And what we're finding is that we have to keep reopening the plan, The final two pieces in the standards are non-starters for a lot of communities. If you cannot say no to big wind, then you are not going to choose to get your plan certified. Because for a lot of people, the noise issue is we will not expose our population to known health effects. And because the issue has not been dealt with in any real way, I would suspect that entire regions will choose not to have their plan certified because of it. So, but in the opportunity to sit down and work, what I would envision is that for a town plan, and this was actually how Act 250 was originally done. I have a nice diagram about with all these concentric circles about how there was an interagency state. You remember that?
Yeah, I tried to put that back in.
Yeah, and so there were some really good pieces that we could put back in. And then people, the Regional Planning Commission would send somebody, the Town Planning Commission would send someone, the utility would send somebody. You would have that full conversation about not just the site, but is it the right size, the right project? Can you work around it? Are there ways to improve it? I see it as a much more, it's not just about a plan. However, if we were to move citing to Act 250 using the current law, then it would have to be conformance with the town plan.
And then then the town would have to do all the planning that is envisioned in 174.
Well, they wouldn't have to because it's not, there's a carrot, and the carrot is getting substantial deference from the board.
True.
But that carrot is not mandatory. And, I mean, my town plan, we did an update last year, and what we did was we have only one area in town that has 3-phase power. So we said for every solar and wind project above a certain size, it needs to go there. Now, I was really uncomfortable with that because we didn't talk to the landowners. And I think if you start seeing how this is going to play out in communities, if you're actually going to be trying to make decisions about people's properties, I don't know what those people think about what we put in our town plan. We met what we thought was what people were looking for, and we're trying to follow what the board wants. And I've looked at your net metering language, and I think it's a very difficult thing to do, to not just say that we want to conserve this area, but that these are the only uses allowed and these uses are not allowed. And to try and do this with all the different complexity of the topography and areas of the state, for a planner, especially volunteer planners who, have a hard enough time trying to get a plan done, it's challenging. And then you see what happens in towns where there are actually fights. So Grafton's been trying to do a town plan for 4 years. Swanton's been trying to do a town plan for a year. So these are real challenges when you actually have real things going on. How do you do that?
I'm trying to get you closure. It's good. So just one last comment that it's some of the comments that you've made about having the plan be open because we'll be telling people what to do with their land, and which is the biggest argument I think that was used against the Act 250 statewide land use plan years ago. It's still a problem.
It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I'm
Yes,
just
it will.
sharing with you what I'm hearing from people.
Sure.
And that is that because the requirement is to be so specific about the site,
Right.
that's very different from what happened initially with Act 250. And zoning basically kind of does that already. But we're in a very, we need to embrace the change in a way that's positive and that can build bridges. And when we put things in there that are sort of top down and create a reaction from people, that's not necessarily going to get us where we need to go.
Okay, thank you. Really, thank you for all the time that you.
What color in the back?
What?
Is that, are those
Is that the
colors?
VLCT? Is that what I'm talking about?
No, that's her.
These are in black and white, but if you want to color one, you can have a color
Are
one.
you sure?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
I only have one color one.
Thank you.
I'll just leave
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you, Annette, very
We
much.
appreciate your time. Before you got here and while you were here.
This was a lot of work.
I know.
And it was,
No kidding.
and working with other citizens, so you're getting the benefit of that input.
And I understand that you have been looking at all of the tape meetings that we had, so I see some of the stuff that we've done in here, talked about in here from the board and the department reflected in your comments. And believe me, that's going to be very helpful as we go forward.